Well, we are live, guys. It's lovely to have a very talented panel, and since this session is all about demonstrating creative strategies for different industries, let me now welcome our panelists for the session. We have Mr. Harshil Karia and Mr. Sahil Vaidya, and of course, our moderator, Kirshan Pampalia. Welcome, guys. It's again another live session which we are going to host for you, and the topic is very specific but very secular, I must say, because different strategies for different industries and something demonstrating different variety of brains needs a tailor-made customization of certain products. And you have to resonate with the audience, the right industries, and the right algorithm for every industry. And the strategies which are made are according to the choice and the pattern of how that industry works. Well, as I've mentioned, we have another good set of panelists. We have Harshil Karia. He's the founder and managing director of Schbang. Who doesn't know that? And we have Mr. Sahil Vaidya, the co-founder of the Minimalist, and they are here to discuss and understand the industry's need, strategies to creatively produce the right effective content strategy, the right effective strategy management for their industry and business. So, without any further ado, I ask and I request all our panelists and, of course, our moderator Kishan to take this forward.
Hey, thanks, Gaurav, for that brief up. Hey, hi, Sahil, Harshil. Glad to be hosting you guys. First of all, very interesting part of the panel today is about the creative strategies for various industries, and I think both the Minimalist as well as Shabang has been the creative minds, the creative warehouses behind a lot of famous campaigns that we know of, or the famous campaigns we'll be seeing. But without any ado, I would like to kind of start with a few questions. First one for you, Sahil. Sahil, we've all seen the famous minimalist portraits, the famous minimalist social media posts, and the most creatively the way they were done. Having created that creative warehouse for you, working with numerous traditional and modern organizations all at once. One, how do you define the basic principles of creativity? I mean, say once a moment happens, there's a moment marketing post, or there's any brief that you have to kind of create a post. What are the first few thoughts and a basic framework for that? Would lovely to hear from you.
Right. So I think the way we look at it is we try to understand both from a positioning point of view and an execution point of view. So since this is about creative strategies, there are these two pillars that are very important. And what I mean by positioning is that even before you get to any particular brief or any strategy, it's very important to understand what a particular brand is going to stand for. And I think that's one thing that it's very easy to miss for all of us when we are working for so many brands, to understand what is that essence of the brand. And then when you go into execution is when you can start doing a lot of varieties of innovation when you're doing that execution. So since you asked specifically about moment marketing, I think it's something that since we've been doing it for the last many years, I think it's kind of a muscle memory for our team. But there are various techniques that can be used, and I think one of the most important things is to identify what the brand's personality is and how that's going to sink into the conversation. So we sort of see what's the brand's tone, how is it that they can respond to that event in their own signature style, and that sort of leads to a lot of the content. Once that positioning level alignment is done, it's all about execution and using some of the design and content techniques, which we have also detailed out in our recent book. So I think it's a lot of stuff around positioning and execution techniques, but at the same time, it's also very important to avoid certain things. I mean, it's not important for brands to comment on everything. After all, brands are humans, and you also have to decide which conversation you won't participate in. So inclusion as well as exclusion is very important to keep in mind.
Makes sense. And Harshil, for you, moreover, I would like to kind of focus much deeper into the entire video part of things altogether. Whenever a creative brief comes in, and may that be for any industry particularly, what's the usual framework for making a creative strategy for the same? Usually more from a creative director angle, I would ask, but not just that, but how do you kind of make an integrated solution for the brand as a whole?
Um, yeah, so I feel for that, a lot of it first comes down to the creative brief and really distilling out the creative brief. So I think there's a client brief And then what we are trying to work on more and more in our system is to distill the client brief into a creative brief. Um so I think that's something that is a general lacuna as a whole across the industry, I find. And I also find it as a lacuna in what the work that we do. So we're trying to get stronger at that, which is distill first the client brief into a creative brief. So what's the business objective? Who is the business going to be won from? Because marketing is effectively a growth driver. So who is the business going to be won from? Which consumer set and why? What would be that key motivator to do that? What is the category trend? Once that is deciphered, then there can be a creative brief saying that within that, these are the elements of the creative brief that will really drive the business. um, and then, coming to your point about the video, then the video gets a little, it depends. So like for example, we're going to release the uh, very soon the video for H&M's Diwali campaign. So there we know that the video, the DNA of the brand, towards Sahil was saying, also you have to also keep in mind the DNA of the brand. So we know the brand is wanting to be in a space that's slightly more whimsical. So that whole
Right.
thing, the whole script is about, like five big stars entering an elevator and exiting a totally different kind of world. So it's a very whimsical video that is there. Or like sometimes you may have a more functional video brief saying that, I want to drive benefit. So yeah, that is. I guess that's the difference that we would have to see brief by brief.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And Harshil, I mean, one more question for you, right? Wanting to understand, you've been earlier into the advertising domain altogether, and then coming from advertising to then marketing all throughout. We have all, like, the first time I ever got to know कि यार ad campaign क्या होता है, I always thought that यार Parle जी का जो campaign होता था या Fevicol का जो campaign होता था, it used to be that kind of a thought in my mind, right? But now I think the gears have altogether changed from not just looking at it from an advertising lens, but an whole and soul marketing angle entirely. Just wanting to understand, what do you think has been the major differences, particularly from an advertising world to a full stack marketing world, and how
Hmm.
have creative things changed, or if they have even changed in that case?
Yeah.
So love to hear your perspective on that.
Honestly, I feel it was always a marketing world, and perhaps there was elements of it which we were exposed to as more advertising. Because I think also
Hmm.
as we grow our exposure of the industry, we understand that it's always been a marketing world. But your observation in general is correct that there are more marketing touch points because of digitization. There are more marketing touch points, so you have more stakeholders involved in the success of the business. So I give you an example of the work that we have done now. 5 years we have done for Cipla for the asthma initiative called Berok Zindagi. So within that,
Hmm.
we know that when we shoot an ad, we shoot an ad, we shoot the main asset, then we shoot ad for doctors, we shoot ads for chemists, we shoot messages for the entire sales team, we shoot separate content for the doctor conferences, so that one day of shoot gets structured into so many different marketing touch points. And then there are images that are shot specifically for doctors. Now with the coming in of automated video and AI based video, you also create content around that which can go personalized to every stakeholder. So I think what's happening is that the ability of the marketing message to become more personalized or tailor made to every cohort that drives business growth, apart from I mean, like, ultimately advertising is for driving consumer demand, but there are also
Right.
other elements of the ecosystem which actually enable and bring more trust and also bring more motivation. So I mean, it's
Yes.
interesting because content is now at a juncture where it can, it sit across all the spectrum. So that's what's interesting.
No, very, very interesting. And Sahil, to you next. I think wanting to understand when you started the Minimalist, right? And I think I have started reading the book now, very recently. My last week in flights, I've been reading those book across and started reading that. Very interesting to know. Very early days of Minimalist, right? When creativity as a concept was not much known to the world, people just told यार कुछ भी बनाया तो viral हो जाना चाहिए. And that's how the Minimalist thing also came up to picture. यार ये post तो viral हो जाता है. In that case, just wanting to understand, when you took it to brands, usually what was the usual pitch like for brands in general? I mean, how did they perceive creativity as a service rather than selling asset as a service or video as a service, that way around? Just wanting to understand what was usual thought process, and how did you convince brands who did not take up lunch, because it's very difficult to kind of trust when it comes at the first go, saying कि यार मेरा चलेगा क्या. So just wanting to understand, how did that entire trust building activity also happen?
Right. No, that's very interesting because when we started, minimalism was not even a thing globally, leave alone India. And which is why we had to start with a lot of proof of work, honestly, which is our own community, which we had to build over time across channels. And looking at that, essentially, a lot of brands started organically reaching out saying that, if you're doing this for fun, why don't you do this for us? And that's literally how the company started. And what we realized was that we didn't have to really hard sell that it sold itself. And I think that's the power of minimalism. Even the work that we often end up doing for even the most traditional organizations or the largest organizations in the country across Tata, Mahindra. These groups also now appreciate the fact that this is the kind of approach that you need to incorporate across marketing briefs. And I'm not just talking about social media, right? So for example, with Tata AIG, we did their entire UI UX transformation. Now, that also involves a lot of elements of minimalism and adopting global standards in order to do the entire journey transformation for digital touchpoints. Now, so if you end up doing that, you start being compared with the likes of the new age digital insurance players, which is where these bigger corporates want to really be. And if they want to get there, they really have to adopt these new age principles. So I think it's been a fun journey to see that uh, traditional brands, corporates, they also want to sort of adopt these global best practices, especially because India has seen the boom of startups, technology companies who are sort of taking their business. So to keep up, these companies also need to be in line and use these modern day techniques like minimalism and many other approaches that we've sort of experimented with over the years.
Interesting. One quick question for the both of you, and I think this is just coming up. This is not a part of my question set, to be honest. I'm asking those my own, but just wanting to understand how do you get your teams to be updated with what's happening on a daily basis? I mean, is it like you ask them to read news? Is it like every day morning there is a thread that comes in the WhatsApp group of the company or a Slack channel saying, "Hey, these are the top updates for the same," or is there a Google notification on? Just wanting to understand how do you cope up with that, and second, how do you ask your brand saying, hey, can we do this for you? Because a lot of times there are a lot of compliance things that happen on the brand's end altogether. So I would like to start from you, and Harshil, love to hear your thoughts also. I mean, how does a team get updated on a daily
Right.
basis to kind of pick up what elements of creativity to work on?
Right. So there are two components to this. One is more of the short-term perspective, and the other is more of long-term trends. So from a short-term perspective, of course, there are, I mean, of course, Slack channels and all do help in terms of staying updated. There are certain processes that have also been set in place because the teams have to really be on their toes. Marketing is all about if the variety of brands that you work with, if they're all humans and humans have things to say when things happen in the world, you have to really be saying them on time. So there are processes, of course, where teams actually share what's happening on a daily basis across different brand teams to understand how is it that a particular brand, whenever relevant, can actually capitalize on those events. And this is part of our moment marketing command center that works across brands. But even on a longer term basis, I think that's much more important, is to do trend spotting on what's really emerging and things that can probably disrupt the entire industry, and which is where more push from the top is required. You have to constantly be in touch with what's happening. We have these monthly inventiveness sessions where we understand what is it really that global agencies and global brands are really doing, which is really inventive, and how is it that that success can actually be demonstrated in India as well. So there's both the short term as well as the long term perspective that needs to be taken.
Interesting. Harshil, your thoughts on the same?
Um, no, nothing that I can add which is different from this. So it's similar in terms of centralized structure of important events days coming together, which is available for everybody, and then that's a push that's done from top down, and yeah, and we keep seeing the work that's there. I think also most of us now live in a 24/7 world, so it's hard to miss a moment. I think it's less about hey, do you know this moment exists, more about what's the relevance that you can bring to the moment. I think that's what the next phase of training or development or thing. I mean, ultimately the message or the creative is what makes or breaks it. So I think it's less about now, hey, let's form a governance structure of making sure we are on top of moments. Now that's second nature for lots of us.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Got it. Interesting. And, I always have felt this while speaking to customers, whenever we go with creative briefs across or we go with creative pitches across, it's at the end of it, things are pretty subjective. I mean, I might like a creative brief like very good. Someone might say, hey, this is just decent. I mean, there's a lot of improvement that can be done. And again, I'm seeing it's a bit of subjectivity that lies over there, wanting to understand how one like what have you learned about people, the way they perceive creativity? May that be the chief marketing officer of a company, or may that be the head of marketing of a company. When you take it, just wanting to understand how do people perceive creativity, and then what are the hooks that usually drive that, like the way they perceive it. So just wanting to understand that. I think Harshil, love to first understand from you.
Um, yeah. So, are you saying what makes a good creative brief, or are you saying what makes a good output?
No, so I'm saying when whatever is made, basically the way we tell it to people, how do they perceive it? I mean, the first go, whenever you pitch something to someone from a creative angle, what are the elements of a human psychology that usually drive that creative angle? Because in order to kind of gain that subjectivity, you just can't keep it open in the dark. These are like the ways you pitch it to a brand, basically, across.
Hmm. So, yeah, I feel. Let me just give you a few specifics if it's helpful. Um,
Sure.
I mean, I'll give a specific in terms of what I'm working on right now. So, because that's fresh off the top of my head, and maybe that's helpful to whoever's listening.
Please.
Firstly, whoever's listening, it's good that people are tuning in, and you guys have done an amazing job on a Saturday afternoon to get so many people to listen into a topic that's so dear to all of us. But so, well, let's say, for example, that to win, to really make a creative idea win. Um, First, I feel like there's a huge approach to be done on planning. So
Hmm.
I give an example of a brief that I'm trying to work on right now, which is more around a launch around 5G. So if you're
Okay.
launching something around 5G, uh, there has to be what we typically try to call it is we try to call it CAB. So which is category, audience, and brand.
Right.
So what's going on in the category at the moment? So who's bought how much worth of spectrum? Who spent how much within the spectrum, who's bought the 600 megahertz, who's bought the 700 megahertz, who's bought the 2600, who's bought the 3.3 millimeter wave, and
Right.
what are the benefits of each one of them, because certain spectrum has coverage, certain spectrum has speed, certain spectrum has is good speed but average coverage. So what's the spectrum mix of all the players? And
Right.
therefore basis a spectrum mix of all the players, because you then understand the category, you understood the spectrum mix of all the players, you know how each one of those is going to really break things down. So player one may say more on speed because they've bought more of the millimeter wave spectrum. Another one may say coverage. So one is to understand, what the competitive marketplace is. The second is to understand the audience. So therefore, what I usually try to do before selling an idea, and I mean, it requires a lot of work because then I'll try to go through all the videos around 5G in this case, what people are
Yes.
commenting. And I know that there's a lot of people then worrying about saying that, hey, 4G to 5G, is there really going to be a difference? My data will run out, so on and so forth. There's some of that stuff. And then there is stuff that's being written by opinion leaders, which is here's where 5G will take us. So there's a bit of let's listen to consumers and really listen, and not that kind of let's employ a social listening tool and get the graphs of so much percent of people say that. I feel like that should be the last thing, especially for people like us, because we should first read and understand the heart of the consumer and then break it down into a graph. Um, and the remaining should be, kind of then you put the graphs together, because otherwise, if you just show graphs at the start, then that's a little random. Um, or at least, I mean, our brain doesn't understand what consumers are saying. So there's the categories, there's the audience, and then there's the brand saying, as the brand, what's the spectrum mix that I've really bought? What's the benefit of my spectrum mix? What's the benefit of my kind of the business that I'm running? What are my consumers saying? Also, what does my brand DNA stand for? What's my design language? And composite of all of that comes together to then say that, hey, actually you need to do this in business terms to succeed. And then in business terms translated as a creative idea as this. So I often feel like if we sell it that way, then it's very easy to sell a creative idea, because it's ultimately going to drive growth of the business.
No, this is very helpful. I think good that I asked this because it was not off your head. Very good example to just understand this bit. Sahil, any thoughts you have to add on this bit overall? How? Because I've always felt the reason I asked this question is I always felt if you play with the mind of a person who's perceiving it, you can actually sell your creativity through. Like it's about storytelling, with of course a lot of data and technology backing it, but it's majorly about storytelling, at least from a creative lens. Sahil, your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I think, like you said, you really need to understand what keeps the CMO or whoever you're pitching it to awake at night, and or you really need to understand what moves product for them. And if you connect to those two things, I mean, if your idea actually is going to impact those two things in any material way, it's an easy sell. And I think, like the framework described, I think it's a very similar framework where you try to understand the business, the competition, category insights, and of course how is it that you can do something different. So I think from a planning perspective, yes, those inputs are extremely critical. Without them, the entire foundation collapses and the idea won't sell itself. But if you would ask about what really influences people to buy into a creative idea, I'll probably go to the next step. Once assuming your planning foundation is in place, I think it all boils down to this thing called inventiveness, which is something which is a rallying cry for us right now. It's about, for us, inventiveness means intelligence for impact. So is your idea really intelligent, and can it really create an impact? And what it also means is that it has to be unusual, in the sense it has to be different from what everyone else has done. I think if your idea has some of those characteristics, it's an easy sell, because uh, when you're pitching it to someone, they also they compare it to the universe of things that they have been seeing off late, and if it seems like something they've never seen before, or it's at least out of the ordinary, it's an easy sell. So I think, yeah, some of those perspectives mixed in with a good bunch of storytelling incorporated into your pitch, I think those are the things that really help.
Super helpful, super helpful. I think last question from my end: how do you cope up with creative fatigue as a whole? I mean, how do you make your teams cope with creative fatigue as a whole when it definitely comes to different industries altogether? Love to hear the thoughts from both of you on this. How do you cope with creative fatigue?
Yeah, yeah, I'll go. So I think creative fatigue is, of course, a real problem, but I think the more you keep mixing things up, both across brands and across, the kind of work that you're referencing, I think it really helps. So always being in touch with what's new globally, and not necessarily in this narrow field that we operate in, which is maybe marketing, design thinking, all of that. I think you have to also look at how creativity works across domains, across businesses. I think that really inspires people. So I think we keep doing these things to sort of ensure that our minds are always open to possibilities in terms of different ways of problem solving. And more than that, I mean, one very personal thing that really helps is to meditate, obviously. And we recommend people to meditate as much as possible. Not just helps you with creativity, it also increases self-awareness, reduces delusions, and I think all of those are very important for you to think creatively.
Helpful, Harshil, your thoughts?
No, I just say I agree with what Silas said. Is good. I'll only say if anybody's listening and is looking for a good meditation app, please download www.level.game, and you'll get a good set of meditations there. So yeah, I agree with what Silas said. I think all are good tools.
No, thank you for this bit. Overall, I think last I mean, just this is not more like a question but more like a tip. Three adjectives that you would always see in a person who you think is the most creative. I mean, whenever you are evaluating creativity in a person, may that be when you're hiring people, may that be when you're shortlisting pitches, may that be when you're taking your vendors on board, whatsoever. Usually, what are the top three things that you think of, like come at the top of your head saying, "Yaar, ye teen to honi chahiye." In these cases, I think Sahil will
It's
go with you.
is
Yeah, please.
okay. No, I was saying that I think it's there's no like I don't think it's the one thing. According to me, it's a lot of it is finish. The finish of the work, and I think where the great opportunity for Indian creative talent is to play today with respect to our finish on the global stage. So just how it looks, how deep it is in terms of the way it translates, what feelings it evokes, the work. It's all about the work. I don't think it's like one, two, or three things. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the work that you're able to put out, the past body of work, and how much depth is there in that. And I think also in this industry right now, I'm glad that in India also we are seeing this time where clients are backing good finish, and they're ready to invest in good finish. So all of us are being able to build our portfolios to the next level. So I think that's really good, and we're setting an exciting time for Indian creativity.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I
And I'll
agree.
change the question saying not an adjective basically, but what's a framework? How you call people the most creative people across?
No, I agree. I think what he meant was also the attention to detail, which is largely present in global markets, if you see. And I think apart from that, what we also, one thing that we typically tend to see is how provocative people can be, because provocation means people are trying to think a little differently, and that's core to what we also look for. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things uh, beyond just provocation. It's about how well thought through the work is. I mean, does it really make sense? I think half of the times a lot of the work may look very good or feel very good, but does it really make business sense is the big question. So I think things that make sense, have attention to detail, and have that flair of differentiation. I think these are just some of the things that we also look for.
No, wonderful,
I also
wonderful.
just want to
Thank
make
you.
one last point, because we have lots of
Please.
people listening in, and I think the other thing that which is again the sitting opportunity for us is the ability to stay close to the consumer. And often there are so many consumers across. So I mean, it may sound a bit boring in a creative session. I've only spoken about brief, and I've only spoken about planning, and I only spoken about consumer. But I feel like we've reached a space where there is so much flair in our creativity that if we just break it and put it down to a level where we are purposeful with it, then we can unleash it to a next level in terms of its what it does for businesses.
No, very, very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you so much, Harshil. Thank you, Sahil. Thank you, gentlemen, for helping the audience with your thoughts on creativity. Because you guys come from running creative warehouses. I mean, campaigns you all look up to. And thank you for this session. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to every panelist over here, and even Kishan for being such a genuine and nice moderator. You faced amazing questions, and many of the questions who are still unanswered, you can get all the replies. The questions will directly be sent to our fellow panelists. Thank you so much once again, Harshil and Sahil. Well, Minimalist and Schbang, mass as well as class, the product is everywhere. And Kishan, your voice has been heard everywhere. So thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.